Now, let me paint another scenario to you of how this may have played out. And I base it almost exclusively on what the Secretary of State Marco Rubio said before he was probably rudely corrected by the administration, maybe his own boss, into reversing his position dramatically in 24 hours.
Everyone, welcome back. I'm genuinely glad you are here for this one because this conversation is on a completely different level. What you're about to watch is a sit-down where Piers Morgan brings in Robert Papp, a political science professor who has spent decades training the United States Air Force and modeling military campaigns to break down exactly what is going wrong in the Iran conflict. And Robert does not soften anything he says. He explains in clear terms why winning battles on the ground and actually winning a war are two very different things. The distinction he makes is honestly one of the clearest explanations I have heard about this entire situation. Trust me, the point he makes toward the end of this clip is the kind of insight that makes you stop and rewind because it really hits. You're definitely going to want to stay for that. Also, take a moment to drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from because I truly enjoy seeing how far this community reaches. Go ahead and say hello down below. All right, let us get into it.
Well, my excellent panel is standing by to discuss all this. We'll begin today's coverage with Robert Papp. He's a leading professor of political science at the University of Chicago and the founder and director of the Chicago Project on Security and Threats. Mr. Papp, welcome to Uncensored.
Thank you very much for having me, Piers.
So, my kind of overview, sitting here in London at the moment, back in my studio, actually for the first time in 8 weeks since I managed to be extremely foolish and fall over a step at a restaurant, break my femur and need a new hip. It's good to be back. Nothing to do with you, Robert Papp, but it's good to be back in my old studio. It seems to me, sitting here and looking at everything that's happened in the last 2 weeks, that two things can be true at the same time. One is that militarily, the combined American and Israeli military, I would imagine arguably the most powerful in history, has inflicted enormous damage on Iranian military and over time would be overwhelmingly obviously able to defeat it. However, the Iranians are fighting a slightly different war, it seems to me. They're fighting an economic war in which they have effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz, where 20% of the world's oil flows through on a daily basis, and they've systematically targeted a lot of places in the neighboring Gulf states that would deter tourists, for example, or expats living in those places from wanting to stay there or visit there. And the combined effect of this is having a very significant, dramatic effect on the global economy. And those two things can be true at the same time.
You've caught it exactly right. So, Piers, just so you know, I have spent years teaching for the U.S. Air Force, helped them stand up an entire school dedicated to air strategy. Just a week before the bombing started, I was giving a presentation at the U.S. Army War College. I spend my years, I have military officers coming getting their PhD under me. So I spend a lot of time here with the U.S. military. We are, as a military, performing superbly at the tactical level. And I want to just emphasize that. And you see, in the smart bomb age, it's especially true that bombs will hit their targets within about 5 meters 90+% of the time, which means you will destroy the missile launchers, which means you will kill the leaders. But that does not guarantee strategic success. And in this case, the goal was to take down the regime, not just simply kill leaders. The goal was to weaken Iran, its power. And what we see after 17 days of war is the regime is resilient and more dangerous than ever, than it was before the bombing. And Iran is now more powerful than it was. In fact, Iran has just achieved what we have spent 50 years in the U.S. military in America trying to prevent, which is control of the Straits of Hormuz. That was the #1 goal of American grand strategy in the Middle East, not Israel. This was the #1 goal, and this is a catastrophic failure. And it is what I call the escalation trap, Piers. It's completely, I've seen this for decades with the Clinton administration. This is not unique to President Trump, but he has fallen into being mesmerized by the power, the exquisite power of our military, into thinking it's omnipotent, that it can achieve any strategic objective. The fact of the matter is we have failed strategically, and we're getting deeper into the trap, which is why none of those allies you just pointed out, perhaps maybe the UK, we'll see, want to go down the tubes with us here.
Robert Pop is not just another voice pulled from social media. This is someone who spent years teaching the United States Air Force and was even presenting at the Army War College just a week before the bombing began. Military officers earned their PhDs under his guidance, so when someone with that level of experience speaks, it is worth paying close attention. What really stood out to me is that he did not start by criticizing the military. In fact, he said the opposite. He explained that the U.S. military is performing extremely well at the tactical level, with bombs hitting within 5 meters of their targets more than 90% of the time. He confirmed that missile launchers are being destroyed and key leaders are being taken out. Then he followed that with a critical point. He said that none of this guarantees strategic success. You have to truly understand what that means, because winning every battle does not mean you are winning the war. These are completely different outcomes, and the people who designed this campaign either overlooked that reality or believed it did not apply to them. What makes this even more historically important is something he highlighted next. For 50 years, the top priority of American strategy in the Middle East has been to prevent any hostile power from controlling the Straits of Hormuz. It was not about protecting Israel or fighting terrorism. It was about that location because 20% of the world's oil moves through it every single day. And Robert Papp stated very clearly that Iran has now achieved exactly that. He described it as a catastrophic failure. What makes that statement so powerful is that he also emphasized this is not limited to one administration. He has seen this same pattern repeat for decades. It is the trap of becoming so confident in military power that you begin to believe it can accomplish any strategic goal, almost as if it is unstoppable. But it is not. The gap between tactical victories and strategic failure is exactly where the situation is falling apart right now.
This is a very, very, very serious problem. And I don't say this with any glee. If I could just say one more thing. This is one of the worst regimes we had in history. So I have no way supporting this regime in Iran. In fact, I've been offered many trips to go to Iran. I refuse to go. So this is not coming from some, sort of dovish support or something. I've supported many, many uses of force. My book's called Bombing to Win. I titled the Substack The Escalation Trap, and it's a tragic trap. And I'm trying to be clear so that we can stop making mistake after mistake after mistake.
Now, let me paint another scenario to you of how this may have played out. And I base it almost exclusively on what the Secretary of State Marco Rubio said before he was probably rudely corrected by the administration, maybe his own boss, into reversing his position dramatically in 24 hours. But he was caught on camera saying that the reason the Americans had preemptively attacked Iran was because they got information that another country, clearly Israel, was about to attack Iran, and that Iran's response to that would be very likely to attack American interests, the bases in the Gulf states, whatever it may be. And therefore, because of that knowledge of the Israeli attack, the Americans would have to preemptively go in to protect themselves from whatever retaliation came back, which seemed a very convoluted excuse for a preemptive strike. But if that is what happened here, and we know from the former Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, that Netanyahu had tried to persuade both Obama and Biden to do the same, saying, I'm about to go in. And then when they said no, he didn't go in. That potentially and possibly Donald Trump got played by Netanyahu here in the same way he tried to play Biden and Obama. And that the reason why Israel might be more relaxed about how this all plays out is that really what they want is a bit different to what America needs out of this. Israel just wants to cause maximum damage to Iran, to its regime. They'd be quite happy with chaos as they were when it happened in Syria. Whereas chaos in Iran, if it involves closing the Straits of Hormuz or attacking the Gulf states next to them or whatever, that does not suit America. So it may be, and I don't know the answer to this, I'm just hypothesizing based on what I heard coming out of Marco Rubio's mouth. If that was why the Americans joined this, then it may be that Netanyahu has taken America into something where he is quite comfortable about this going on for a long period of time, but it won't suit the American national interest.
This is the moment that truly made me stop, because everything leading up to this was already serious enough. There was strategic failure, a stronger Iran, and allies stepping back from involvement. Then Piers Morgan introduced something that completely reshapes the discussion. He brought up what Marco Rubio said publicly before he was quickly forced to walk it back within a day. Piers explained it in a very clear way. He said that Rubio's own reasoning was that the United States launched a preemptive strike because they had information that another country, clearly Israel, was about to attack Iran, and that Iran's response would likely target American bases in the Gulf. So the United States chose to act first. Take a moment to really process that. The United States initiated a military campaign not because of a direct threat to itself, but because of what another country might do and the potential consequences of that action. That is an extremely complicated chain of reasoning to justify entering a war. It becomes even more striking when you consider what Piers added next. He pointed out that according to former Secretary of State Antony Blinken, the exact same proposal had been presented to two previous administrations. The message was clear. An attack was about to happen. Both times the response was no, and in both cases the attack never took place. Think about what that pattern suggests. It indicates that the threat of immediate action may have been used as leverage. Two administrations evaluated that pressure and chose not to proceed. This administration made a different choice. Robert Papp addressed this directly. He said that even if the explanation is completely accurate, it still does not justify launching a campaign that could turn disastrous. That statement cuts through every layer of explanation and leaves a simple reality. A decision was made. The consequences are now unfolding, and the reasoning behind it does not fully stand up to serious examination.
Yeah, let me just make 2 points about this. Now that this is becoming a strategic disaster, Piers, the blame game is already in full throttle here. So you're going to see that. And I don't do politics, okay? So, but nonetheless, second point, which is, let's assume you're right here. That's not a good enough excuse for launching a disastrous campaign. So what that means, what that tells me is we really thought we had escalation dominance. We really thought they couldn't do anything, even when apparently General Kane warned President Trump they would take the Strait of Hormuz, even though that was our number one planning scenario for 50 years here, 45 years here. He dismissed that. And yes, maybe Netanyahu's on the phone, but let me point out last fall, President Trump came down hard on Netanyahu's plan to cleanse Gaza of hundreds of thousands of people. So if President Trump wants to, he can stand up to Israel. In this case, we have to do something that's strategically smart.
Yeah, I mean, look, and it may be that Donald Trump, when he was informed the Ayatollah was with all his top people in a place that could be hit, took a view that, a bit like with Venezuela and Maduro, that he could get in, they could take out the leadership. It would dramatically change the dynamic, perhaps, if they got somebody who wasn't quite as fanatical replacing the Ayatollah. But of course, even if you take that argument, which might well be the case, I'm not saying for a moment that I think Donald Trump can be easily railroaded by Netanyahu, but if he got involved for that purpose, very quickly he said, look, we want regime change. We want to see the people rise up. He spoke directly to them. We've seen none of that, probably because the people remember being slaughtered in the street when they protested in January, and there are loads of bombs flying over the street, so why would they risk their lives? We've also not seen, we believe the supreme leader has been replaced by his son, but there's no sign of this son still being alive. There are reports he's gone to Moscow to have urgent surgery, all sorts of stuff about this guy. Whether he's alive or not, we don't know yet. But either way, there's no doubt the regime remains intact. The people are not rising up. And so you're left with looking back at what Donald Trump said in the immediate aftermath of launching the attacks, and none of that is manifesting itself. So I
Piers-
just think if I was advising Donald Trump, I'd be like, look, you've got to do something quickly here because your original mission statements simply aren't happening and are probably unlikely to happen.
So it's important to know, Piers, that I've studied every air campaign since World War I. I've modeled the bombing of Iran for 20 years, so I know quite a bit about all these details. And it's important to know that in over 100 years, air power alone has never, and I'm choosing my words carefully here, never toppled a government.
This is where Robert Papp delivers what may be the most important context in the entire discussion, and it is something you really need to absorb because it is based on documented history, not opinion. He explained that he has studied every air campaign since World War I and has spent 20 years modeling this exact type of scenario. Then he made a very deliberate statement. In more than 100 years of warfare, air power alone has never successfully removed a government from power. Not once. From the Second World War to Korea, from Vietnam to the Gulf War, and from Iraq to Libya, air power can cause massive destruction. It can take out leadership and significantly weaken military forces, but it has never on its own led to the collapse of a government. This is incredibly important because regime change was presented as a central objective from the very beginning. The expectation was that the population would rise, leadership would fall apart, and a new Iran would emerge. Yet here you have a military expert who has dedicated his career to studying these situations, saying that outcome has no historical precedent. It has never happened that way, not a single time. What makes this even more difficult to accept is the detail he shared about General Kaney. According to him, the general directly warned that Iran would move to control the Straits of Hormuz if attacked. That warning was clearly identified as a major concern for nearly 50 years, and it was still dismissed. You have to understand what that means. When warnings are given, when history provides clear evidence, and when strategic risks are fully documented, yet the decision is still made. That is not simply a mistake caused by missing information. It is something much deeper. The lesson that continues to appear throughout history is simple but powerful. You can win every single battle and still fail in achieving the larger goal. Military strength is not the same as strategic intelligence, and the space between those two is where real consequences exist. So what do you think about all of this? Share your thoughts in the comments, make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.